Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Conf42Cast. My name is Miko Pawlikowski, I'll be your guide, and today my guest is Robert Ross, the CEO of FireHydrant. How are you doing, Robert?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Doing great. Okay, I was tempted to call you Bobby Tables immediately because I've kind of been thinking about it a lot with the XKCD reference. Is that okay? Can I call you from now on that?
Please do. It's been my nickname for over 10 years at this point. It's my GitHub, my Twitter, my Instagram. I think it's my LinkedIn. So yeah, I'm very accustomed to that name at this point.
So how did it start? Like, did you just pick up, a random XKCD? You're like, oh, I'm Robert. This is Robbie. Let's do that.
It wasn't even my choice, actually. I was working back when I was 19. I was working as a developer, and three of my colleagues actually started calling me Bobby Tables because I think that was around when that comic came out. And one of the guys that changed my nickname since then is actually my co-founder and head of engineering at FireHydrant now. But yeah, that's how it started. I gained a nickname as a young adult, and it just hasn't gone away.
That's awesome because pretty much I think everybody I know knows the reference. So, that immediately gives you familiarity. So kudos for that. One other thing that everybody notices when they look up your trail on the internet is that you talk a lot about reliability. Pretty much everything, every piece of content I've seen had something to do with reliability so far, be that a blog, the FireHydrant, or your YouTube, video portfolio. So maybe a good place to start would be to define, kind of tell us why reliability is so important to you and what it even means, because, it's one of those things that everybody knows what it is, but if you were to define it, it might not be that easy. So what's your take on that, Bobby Tables?
And my take on reliability is, if we kind of look around the world, reliability in software is more and more critical. We're using software right now to produce this podcast, and we're going to be using software to then publish this, and we use software to pay our bills and check our bank balances. And right now we're seeing software become more of a utility than kind of like a nice to have. It's becoming almost as important as the water from our faucets and the electricity from our outlets. We expect it to just kind of work now because we're so reliant on it. And when you're reliant on something, that thing, we kind of have expectation of reliability of it working consistently. And what we say at FireHydrant is that reliability is not an engineering metric. It's actually a business metric. And the way that we explain this is that if we have an outage and we have a high expectation for reliability for ourselves, but I should be saying when we have an outage, people aren't going to be saying, our customers, our users, people looking at our product, they're not going to say the FireHydrant engineering team is having an outage. It's just not the way that we kind of think about products and brands when they have outages. We say the company is down, right? So FireHydrant is down, or Slack is down, or the New York Times is down, right? Like whatever the company is, we don't really think of it as a consumer of that product or technology as an engineering problem. We think of it as like a business problem. So that's why reliability to us it's much more than engineering. It's beyond that. It's legal needs to get involved, marketing gets involved, and all of almost every department at a company gets involved for massive outages. Many companies are paying millions of dollars in SLA refunds because of outages in the last couple of years. It's becoming an expensive thing for companies to experience these. So, on the topic of what is reliability to me, us, my inner circle, it kind of extends beyond software. It's do people perceive you as being reliable? And it's kind of an interesting metric. Like reliability is not something you actually get to say. You don't get to say we're reliable. If a customer doesn't think you are reliable, you're not reliable. It's a weird kind of thing that you just kind of have to be. You just have to be so reliable and so trustworthy to your customer base that they will kind of give you that badge that you are reliable.
Absolutely agree with that. And also what you mentioned about a client, it's easy to kind of lose that badge with a single incident, which kind of adds to the pressure of that. And then obviously uh, depending on what kind of company you are and what kind of business you do, your reliability metrics or understanding of that is going to be very different, right? Do you work with any particular types of companies, or are you like flexible enough to kind of work from anybody from banking to, I don't know, dog walking?
We work with so many different companies. We work with consumer companies. We work with large B2B SaaS companies. Really, anyone operating software at really any scale has a potential use case for an incident management tool. It could be us, it could be, whatever it is, but any company operating at some level of scale, let's just maybe the benchmark is, they have a few customers, like that's probably already enough to start caring about reliable software. So really, we work with teams of all sizes in multiple industries.
So you sound like someone who, does a lot of this. So if you were to come up with like a pizza recipe for reliability, what would be the ingredients in that? What goes into that?
How much dough do we have? This is a lot of this is going to be a big pizza. I mean, it really depends on your business. I think that the first thing about, if I were to have a recipe for reliability, wow, I might make friends, I might make enemies with the way I answer this. So I'm like thinking a lot about it. I think the first case that I would really go for is making sure that everyone understands what reliability kind of means to your business. Like the first ingredient is buy-in, making sure that everyone is bought into this concept of reliability is not an afterthought. It is built into your products. It's built into your processes. And even if your systems fail, building in certain processes for your customers to know that something is broken, like all of that has buy-in from customer success to marketing to legal. Like again, reliability is a business metric. So first ingredient, buy-in. I think second ingredient is partitioning off what your customers would complain about and understanding the impacts of those things when they are down. And we call them functionalities. That's the term that we use. I've heard product areas, product feature, or whatever you want to call it. That's fine. But really being able to break down your application to what the value is that you're providing to a customer. And the reason I think this is valuable in this recipe that I'm coming up with right now is that if you don't know why people are using your product, or the things that can break, or really the things that if they were unavailable, your customers would come running at you with pitchforks, you can't possibly build a reliable system because you don't even know what needs to be reliable. And you don't even know what level of expectation your customers have for that thing being reliable. A classic example is it okay for an email, a daily update email, to be an hour late? Probably in most cases. Is it okay for a forgot password email to be an hour late? No. So like being able to understand the functionalities that your application provides, and honestly, it's going to be a lot. It's not a small list. That's probably the second ingredient. So we have buy-in, we have knowing what can break, and the expectations, or like the what users are using that thing for and why it's important to them. And then I think having an understanding of what breaking is, and this really starts to dive into like service level objectives, service level agreements. There's a bunch of great companies doing things for this, like Noble Nine. They're helping companies kind of understand the impact of these systems when they are down, and the agreements that they've created for themselves and for customers when they're broken. I think that you have to know what the state of good is, like a measurable thing. And that's where an SLIs and SLOs kind of come into play. And then I think the third thing is ownership. Or fourth thing, I can't count, off by one error. Ownership is like, if no one owns anything, nothing will be reliable. If there's a certain thing that breaks and nobody actually owns that thing, you're going to have a tragedy of the commons where people will kind of look at it and go, who's going to fix it? Oh, someone will fix it, and they're going to go off
Yep.
and do their own thing. So you have to have someone that you explicitly say, these functionalities, when these SLOs are not meeting their criteria, you own fixing that thing. And a lot of this is, abstract in thought, but I think that if you have those four ingredients, and I would probably add a fifth ingredient, which is
Fire
a
hydrant.
level of process. I could say that. But no, I think that the fifth ingredient is knowing what to do and the expectations when something is unreliable. What is that process? Are you responsible for fixing it, or are you calling the fire department? Are you calling 911? And then at that point, you should buy a fire hydrant. But that's all I'm going to say about that.
I was kind of looking at you counting fingers, and I saw, just kind of the shadow of previous experiences. Can you share some anecdotes, like, your favorite go-tos that you bring up at every family gathering about reliability? What's your
Oh, God.
most spectacular one that you can actually disclose?
So I've worked for a couple of companies in my career. I've worked at DigitalOcean in the past. I forget, namely HR, where I was a staff SRE, and probably one of my favorite problems that we had. I'll use an example from namely. I have two quick ones I'll share. One day, we saw that we were in a moratorium, a code moratorium. We weren't deploying anything new. No features were being released around, but in between, around Thanksgiving time to the end of the year. And the reason that Namely did that was because as a payroll tax software, a lot of people are offboarding off of Namely and onboarding onto Namely around that time. It's in HR world, it's called year end, year start. It's the busiest time of year for these companies. It's basically the highest risk time for something to break. And we're in our moratorium, we're in the office, and I'm on the SRE team, and suddenly the whole thing just goes down. And it was an interesting time because as an engineer for a number of years, the first thing I always look for is, well, what changed? What did we deploy? And we were saying, well, nothing deployed. We're in a moratorium. Okay, well, something changed. Did our data center get hit with a meteor? Like, what happened? And we're diving in, and and this is where ownership came to was a problem, is because there was no one. The application itself was broken. It was serving 500s. So at that point, is it the application team that should be responding to this, or is it the SRE team that should be responding to this? So naturally, everyone responded to this incident. And then we had, in typical Thanksgiving form, too many cooks in the kitchen. And we
Yep.
had everyone was giving their theories, and it just as you have a lot of red herrings, and this outage went on for quite some time. And eventually, we realized that our Postgres database instance memory was getting super high. It wasn't out of memory, but it was climbing, and that actually put the instance into it was using more CPU cycles as well because it was doing more work. And we were using an instance class of AWS that had for CPU credits, and we had exhausted the CPU credits, so that meant that our CPU suddenly grinded to a halt a little bit, and queries that were previously working very well weren't. And then what we realized is that our memory was also going up at the same time because we weren't deploying. We never hit this memory problem where it was exhausting resources basically on this instance, where because we were always deploying, which was deploying our application. You might be wondering, well, if you're deploying your application, how does that affect your database's memory? Well, it turns out Ruby on Rails, our framework of choice, had a problem where it was creating multiple prepared statements against our database. That uses a lot of memory in Postgres because it's a new prepared statement per connection. And there were 16 connections per pod, and it was just a lot of prepared statements. It was a Ruby on Rails bug that involved like date queries or something like that. It was like and it's a known Ruby on Rails bug. So if you're on like Ruby on Rails 5.1, maybe you go look for this bug. And then we eventually realized, because the graph would like do this every 2 days, and we realized, oh, that's when we deploy on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was this like crazy situation where we had a lot of people responding to the incident. Everyone in customer success was also in our incident channel, and we had like 100 people responding to this incident, all because we didn't deploy. And that was really the crux of it. So when I say like my recipe is honestly based on incidents like that, where nobody knew what to do, and yeah, I could yeah. And I said I had another one, but I think that one kind of like captures a lot.
Yeah, I think that one will do. And it feels like a very good segue into incident response in general, right? If one goes to a certain firehydrant.com website, it seems to suggest that what we call incident response is broken. Is that a true statement? At least like the way it's done today.
I talk to a lot of engineers, and when I pose the question, "What's your incident response process like?" A lot of the time, I get like a set enum of answers here. We don't have one. It's chaos, or uh, it's outdated in Confluence. Those are like the three answers I get, and sometimes it's we need to add a incident response process. That's like the other category that yeah. So a lot of people tend to respond with it can be better. I think that incident response is not a set it and forget it thing. It's going to evolve because your systems are going to evolve. Your team structure is going to evolve. You're going to replace an application with from Ruby to Go, or if you're going like if you're breaking microservices, that was a super contrived example, but it happened multiple times in my career. Like your incident response process is going to constantly evolve, and companies need to like recognize that really all of your processes are going to evolve, but saying this is our incident response process, I mean, it's going to change. So our headline on our website is really to talking to that.
It's fair enough. One other thing that I liked on the website in the blog category was about throwing away postmortems.
Ooh.
And there was a few good options. I think my vote definitely goes to Downy Whoopsie. It's a good alternative. But why? What's wrong with postmortems?
So if you look at the term postmortem, the definition for it usually involves, depending on which dictionary you look at, it's going to involve the word death and dying, and post-death is really what postmortem means. And the problem that I have with that is that people aren't dying usually, right? Like there are a few software companies that it is a life or death situation. And maybe at that point, if they have that type of incident, maybe you do actually call it that. But for the most of us in our roles and position, postmortem actually doesn't fit what you're doing. It's actually you're running a incident retrospective. You are looking at what happened during an incident, the timeline of events, the multiple hypotheses and theories that were running around during the incident. Like you're running a retro on a shorter period of time that caused pain for people. So that's why I think postmortem is just isn't a good term. And actually, it started. There was a gentleman in Toronto that was telling me that their whole company was actually getting rid of the term postmortem. And I kind of latched on to that as an idea because databases are hard to change. Our database still actually has the table postmortems, but we actually relabeled our entire website. The interface to that database is actually retrospective everywhere now. And I'd love to change it at some point, but schema changes are hard.
Well, you should definitely add an option on the website to switch it to Downy Whoopsie.
Yeah,
How about
down
that?
UMC. I like the site seance as well.
Definitely. Okay. So we've been kind of, walking around the aisles of reliability, incident response, and you've vented some of your frustrations. So let's hit now directly at the fire hydrant. And so tell me, how is it different from like the other offerings? How is it different from things like PagerDuty, for example? What's the
We're
unique
building
offering, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, we're building an integrated reliability platform. We are focused on incident management a lot today, but we also have an awesome service catalog component to our application as well that involves change events and really like deploy tracking built into the application. And we don't build anything into our product, or we try as best as we can to avoid building siloed functionalities. We don't want to create something that doesn't improve the experience of existing functionality. So when FireHydrant first started, the first parts of FireHydrant was actually not incident management. The initial bedrock of the application was service catalog. It was the first database records created. It was the first thing that the application had. And the reason for that is because to have appropriate incident management, at least in my opinion, when this was on a side project before we became this company that we are today, we always wanted to know which services were impacted on which environment. So we built service catalog into FireHydrant, and then that just directly influences our incident management functionality. And then service catalog also has change events that can link to services and the environments that they're running on, which then also get pulled into incident management automatically if something happened recently. So FireHydrant will actually say, hey, did you know there was a recent deploy to this service on this environment that you've opened an incident for? Like, we're building it in a way that nothing in our application doesn't enhance or magnify something else in it. And I think that's a pretty big differentiator between us and other software vendors out there. We think that reliability, again, is a business metric. It touches so many parts of a business that you can't build like featured silos for reliability. They have to all interact with each other.
And what's the kind of like deployment model? Because that's always tricky with this kind of, stuff that basically knows everything about what you're running. Is that a service, software as a service kind of thing? Can you run it on-prem? What's the deal?
So we're exclusively a software as a service. We operate and host all of our application.
Okay. And another question that kind of came to my mind when you were describing that, I wonder who's like the primary person that you actually sell this kind of software to, because I suspect that there's at least like two groups, right? The decision makers, like managers, whoever, who say, okay, guys, we should be using this and bring it to the team, or just, the software developers who are kind of upset, or SREs who are kind of upset things are not better and might suggest that. What's the kind of like best case scenario for that working in these two cases, or maybe other cases that might be more popular for you?
Yeah. So our buyers, I mean, the people that use our tool the most are really like the engineering team, the people deploying applications and operating them, and the people that get the people that will help us integrate into the existing processes and things like that'll be a leader of some sort. Maybe it's a tech lead, maybe it's a manager, but we've worked with incredible teams that the FireHydrant tool itself was implemented by the engineers. And that's why I kind of love what we're building, is that we are our audience at the same time. And not a lot of people get to say that when with the products that they're building. Like, I love working at Namely, great company. I am not passionate about payroll and tax software or benefits. That is not my calling. I couldn't tell you what features Namely needed, right? I could build them. I could have someone say, we should probably build this gross bonus calculator. Cool. I wouldn't have been able to come up with that myself. But with FireHydrant, like, we get to say, you know what I wanted in my career 5 years ago? I wanted this thing. And that really resonates with people that are looking at our software. You can kind of look at FireHydrant as an engineer, an SRE, whoever, and go, oh, this is built by someone that had this problem. And that's why we kind of resonate the most with the ICs of an organization, and anyone technical, anyone that's ever written code. We can have a full-blown candid conversation with those people about our tool.
From engineers to
From it,
engineers. That's the
yeah.
best kind. Yeah, awesome. And and that kind of naturally flows into a question about, so what's the startup life like? Starting things, growing them up, a nice little Series B, fresh off the presses. How is that? How is that going for you? What's the best, the worst?
Yeah, the best and the worst. So I think like a little bit of context. The joke that I like to say is that I accidentally started FireHydrant. It was a side project. It was something I was building for fun, nights and weekends, midnight oil, early morning coffee at 5 a.m. And I like just started building this thing. And it just happenstance, right place, right time, raised a series seed for this. And then that's really what started this company. And my two co-founders, Dylan and Dan, joined. Being totally honest, and competitors are going to listen to this and maybe weaponize it, but that's fine. But like we had no idea what we were doing, right? Like we were in the earliest days of startup. We were first time founders. We wanted to build just a great product. That's all we really thought about was product. And we started by just heads down product. I think that we started to learn just how many acronyms there are in like B2B sales, like GTM. I remember at one point I had to look up like what GTM meant, go to market, and then all the other acronyms like SQL, MQL, and you just kind of get overwhelmed with non-engineering things. And that started to happen right around May of 2019 is when we started to like, okay, we're gonna start to like push this. We're gonna try to make some sales here, and that's when I became a salesperson. I transitioned from engineering into sales. That was challenging because one of the things that I've learned in this wonderful journey so far is that it's when you're good at something, you want to keep doing that thing that you're good at, right? You don't want to, at least for me. And I discovered that I always found myself like meddling back in the code base. I kind of always found myself like, I don't want to send this sales email, so I'm going to write this pull request for this feature that I want to build. That would just happen and happen. And it took a long time to actually like pull myself away from writing code. And I'll be honest, I still have a hard time with that. I think I actually shipped a PR today for something that was super small, I swear, and not a net giant new feature. And I think that that's been one of the hardest things, and is a low some days because I love writing code. That's what I want to do. I like constructing things. I like building things, and it's hard to kind of change your mentality around like I'm not building a code base anymore. I'm building a team. I'm building a process for scaling this organization. I'm building a company. I'm trying to build a great company. It's systems thinking, but without the code editor. It's also one of the most rewarding things. I mean, we've grown up to 68 employees, most of which we've hired during a global pandemic. I mean, when the pandemic started, I think we had 9 people, and now we're up to 68. That's a feat. I mean, that's a lot of people to hire remotely over Zoom. That's a lot of interviews and met most of the company I have not met in person. That has been a wild challenge, but super gratifying to build the company that I wish I could have worked at and that my co-founders wish that they could have worked at. And that's what we're trying to do. That is kind of our litmus test. Is FireHydrant a place that we would want to work at as a software engineer, as a salesperson, as a marketer, right? That's our litmus test. And that's what we kind of ask ourselves as much as we can to see if this is still the place that we would want to work.
Love it. And I mean, the growing part of that during the pandemic, that's probably a topic for, another episode entirely. But, I'm always thinking like that can't be more awkward than reviewing a PR from a CEO here and there. Like, do I tell him off for that? Do
I
let this
encourage
slip?
people. No, that we have a great engineering team, and they don't hold punches back, and it's great. And I kind of love it actually. So yeah, hey, this abstraction is bad. Like yeah, you're right. Okay, let me do
Just
that.
kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. All right. Sounds like a great place to be. And sounds like you're enjoying being the CEO after all, right?
Sorry, yeah. I mean, I did not. If you had asked me 3 years ago, which was when FireHydrant would have still been a side project, right about now is when the fundraising started for the Series Seed. I don't think I would have ever have said, "Hey, we are working with these companies, and we have 68 employees, and we're going on podcasts now." Like, there's just no way I would have predicted any of that. So it's super exciting. I feel incredibly fortunate. I am very fortunate to be in the position that I am and working with the team at FireHydrant.
Awesome. Yeah, very happy for you. So since we're at it, let me try to extract a little bit of, golden nuggets for anybody who might want to follow your path and, in general, career advice apart from, don't know what you're doing. So if you were to like give, some actual serious advice to someone who wanted to be like following an adventure like yours, what would be like the most important piece of advice that you would give them?
The most important advice I could give you is your product will only feel as good as you feel. And what I mean by that is don't overextend yourself. Don't work for 16 hours a day and think that that's gonna like do the trick. one thing that we've really focused on here is a work-life balance. And I don't think I can recommend anything more than take care of yourself, because if you take care of yourself, you'll be able to take care of your company and your product and the things you want to do. Any day that I am not feeling great, I will go focus on that, because that's my new problem. That's the new biggest problem I have, is not feeling great. So if your company is maybe having problems, I would actually kind of look inside, like, are you having problems? Do you need a mental break? Do you need to not work on a weekend? And it's a struggle, because I think that there's a hustle culture in at least the United States, and in startups and venture backed
Yeah.
companies. There's a hustle culture where it's almost a competition to see who works the hardest. That's not the game you're playing. It's an infinite game. There's a book called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, and he basically says that there's no timer. It's not like a basketball game. There's no timer. There's no known rules, right? So why are we all? There's so many people out there saying, like, I worked 16 hours, like it's a badge of honor. Plenty of science out there says that you are not any more effective past 8 hours, at past 40 hours a week. Like, you are actually not more effective over time. So you might as well work 40 hours. And that was a long answer to a short question you gave me, but I genuinely think that mental health and you operating at your best is the best thing that you can do for your company and your team.
That's a really nice answer, and it's definitely coming from the CEO part of you. In that case, a bonus question for the coder in you. What's the most exciting tech thing, technology, language, whatever that's coming and that's worth following?
Oh man, what a
Pick one.
one. Pick one. I'm excited to see. This is not going to be a tech or framework or anything, and I'm sorry. I know that people love to hear it's going to be Go or Rust, and like Go's already kind of there, but I think the next big thing that we're going to start seeing in technology is like contract driven development. And what I mean by that is, I think that we're going to start to see effectively schematics of software before software is built, more and more and more. And really hugely successful open source projects are built this way. Hugely successful companies are built this way. Abraham Lincoln has a quote. If he's given 5 hours to chop down a tree, he's going to spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. And I think a lot of software companies and teams are, if they're given 5 hours, they're just going to jump into their editor for 5 hours. And I think the biggest shift that I see coming in software is planning, like sharpening that axe for 4 hours. And I think it's going to be in the form of design docs. I think it's going to be in the form of API schemas defined first, either using Swagger, Open API spec, maybe it's gRPC service definitions, Thrift, whatever it is. I genuinely think that that's going to be the next thing that we're going to change in our careers. And it's just going to make better software. If everyone in the world treated that as a standard, like imagine trying to go build a building without a blueprint. Good luck. So I know it's probably not the answer you're looking for, but I think that that's what's coming.
It's a great answer. And I like the quote, and I'm totally stealing it from now on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Bobby, all good things come to an end. This has really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing all the nice little nuggets, and thank you for this really exciting and frank conversation. All the best for FireHydrant, and time for a little plug at the end. How does one get started? Where do they go? What's the best way to go from zero to FireHydrant?
Fastest way is to go to firehydrant.com and create a free account. You don't need to talk to our sales team. They're great. They're amazing. They'll certainly be happy to help. But I know that developers just want to try the thing. So we encourage it. Top right, there's try it for free. No credit card required. You can use our API. You can use our Terraform provider, the Kubernetes integration to get started really quickly. And you can start opening incidents from within Slack in the first 10 minutes of creating your trial, and managing and having great incident management, great retrospectives, and a fully up-to-date service catalog all at the same time. So firehydrant.com. Also, if you want to tweet at me or at our Twitter, it's at firehydrant, and at Bobby Tables for me personally. I'll happily answer questions.
And for everybody who loves it so much, they also want to wear a baseball cap like yours?
I will put one personally in the mail for anyone that wants a cap or any other of the we got socks, shirts, you name it.
There you go. Yeah, and we have all been deprived of swag because of the lack of conferences.
If you're our joke right now is if your thread pool is running low, come talk to us.
Good one. All right. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully, I'll see you another time for this. And yeah, all the best.
Thanks so much for having me, and chat soon.
Cheers.